Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to welcome back Emily A. Myers. Emily, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I am so glad you're here. And first off, we have to bring everybody up to speed. What have you done since we've last chatted?
Yeah, so the last time we talked, I was actually gearing up to launch the sequel to my first book. So that would have been Bound by the Unspeakable. So since then, I've launched that. I've written and released a mafia romance called Mind to Protect, which I'm obsessed with. And I have also just finished writing and I'm gearing up to launch. Actually, by the time this comes out, it will be released a poetry meets self-help book called I Still Have Love to Give. And since doing that, I'm actually in the process of planning a whole new series that I'm going to start writing next year, which is going to expand my mafia world first started in Mind to Protect. So I've been busy.
That's what I hear. And one of the things that I love about what you just said is basically you've also not just expanding these worlds for your characters, but for yourself by switching genres. You've gone from mystery suspense into nonfiction poetry. So, I mean, talk about
Mhm.
different genre shifts and changes. And I love that and how they all serve you. They serve you as the writer. So, how would you talk a little bit about that? Like, how does fiction help and serve you? And then how did this nonfiction poetry self-help serve you?
That is a really good question. I think fiction has always been my passion and my dream. And I don't necessarily view it as a way of like expressing myself. I view it more as a chance to put myself in someone else's shoes and live a different life and have more empathy for all the different types of people that exist in the world that we have today. The poetry is much more my own experience and my own emotions. And whereas with fiction, I have to think a lot, I have to plan a lot, I have to make sure that there's consistency in so many different areas. With the poetry, I don't have to think at all. I can just write and feel the emotions. And that is my way of processing things when things are tough.
I love that you said that you've demonstrated just by the fact of poetry that writing is cathartic. Writing can help you process, writing can help you make decisions because sometimes if you're writing to just let your feelings out or what you're trying to process, it might help you to come to a decision because you can write out. So, what happens if I go this way? What happens if I go that way? You can really use writing, whether you just treat it as a journal or you choose to put it in a different structure like you did with poetry, but they're still serving the same purpose. So, when you were working on your poems, did you have a vision in mind in the sense that they always had a rhyme to it, or they always had a certain structure to them? Or did each poem stand unto itself the way it just needed to? And if some had, rhyme, great. If some had certain structure, great. And how did you come through that?
I think as a writer, I just have a certain style. And one thing I will say before I get really specific on the poems is that I went back and read a section of my Mafia romance book after I finished writing this collection. And I had not read that book in over a year. And I noticed there were common phrases that I was using in both my poems and the fiction. So I think I just have a particular voice and a particular style that transcends genre. And so with the poems, I do typically like to have some rhyme, but I feel like it comes natural. All of the poems are going to be different lengths. Some of them are very short, some of them are multiple pages long. Each poem is focused on a specific, either referring to a specific situation or a specific emotion. And so it's as long as it needs to be to reach a point of conclusion for that. And I might have some lines that don't rhyme, but I typically include rhyme. and it just comes natural.
I love that. So you have the poems all written. Let's just say that they are all, you've written all the poems you're choosing to write at this point. Did you go back and say, okay, now I need to build a book? And the book was designed by saying, I think I want this type of theme to start, and then it builds to this theme, and then this theme, and then going back and aligning the poems with that. Like, how did you actually structure a book of poems?
That's a really good question. So I actually started writing, I mean, very early this year. This book is practically a year's worth of me processing things. And when I first started, it was going to have 5 sections, and I was going to be talking about a lot of different things, from my divorce to losing my dad to cancer, even some things that I've struggled with self-confidence in my body, and different issues that I've had with, certain people in my life, even some controversial opinions or polarizing opinions. I was planning to write about everything. And I really was thinking, I think it was originally going to be called Lay Me Bare. So it was going to be like, Lay Me Bare. This is everything that I have to say. But then what actually happened was the majority of what I was writing was about certain love and dating situations that were happening in the present day. And by the time I decided to switch gears and start writing about some more personal things, specifically my dad, I just could not do that because I felt like I had come so far with a lot of the things that I had already been writing about. I didn't want to put myself back into a negative headspace. So that's when I looked at what I did have and I realized, okay, well, this could actually be essentially a book about love and heartbreak and dating and getting to a place of having hope again after you've gone through that heartbreak. And I already had several poems written that I wrote years ago when I was going through my divorce. And I had the present day poems that I was writing. And I was like, okay, well, I need to kind of maybe flesh out the first section. We're going to tell this like it's a story. So we start with what happened years ago, the event, the divorce, the heartbreak. I'll write a little bit more to flesh that section out because there were some poems that I had written years ago that I no longer felt comfortable publishing. And then the second section, which is actually the longest section in the book, was about the present day experiences and emotions. And then I knew, okay, I need to have a third and final section, which is like me on the other side of all of this. So, me describing the type of love that I want, the type of life that I want after not only my experiences, but reflecting on those experiences in therapy. So it was almost a process of elimination. And then once I decided, okay, this is going to be about love and heartbreak, it was more about telling the story of my experience in the order that it happened.
Yeah, so that's what I'm hearing is that the book was structured in a way to take the reader on a journey, but
Yeah.
yet if it also sounds like, and given the nature that they're poems, if a particular poem just speaks to the reader at that time, it's also okay to read it out of order. It's okay to read it, as to what's called you in that moment. So
Yeah.
what I also hear you doing is that when you were writing, some of it was in order, but a lot of it sounds like was, this is how I'm feeling in this moment, I'm writing, and then going back and saying, now where does it actually fit? And so, and that can happen so much in a writer's world when you're writing a book, because you sometimes you can write it in order and sometimes you don't.
And that's actually funny though, because for me, I mean, all of this does occur in order.
Mhm.
So it was funny because when I look at it, I'm like, wow, this could actually be a romance novel. Like the plot structure, the way that these things happened in my life actually happened in the structure of a romance novel. And so that was very funny to me. Yeah. So deciding on the order of things, it wasn't that difficult because I was like, okay, all of these poems were written as things happened. They show a progression of what was happening. And of course, and I describe, I think there's a note in here that it can be read in order to get the full experience, but it of course can be read, like how one would normally read poetry. If there's a title that stands out to you, you can go ahead and read that. There's also a short reading section that has my favorite individual lines from the poems, as well as there are going to be several individual lines that are from the vault, which are unpublished poems that are not in this collection, but they were lines that I loved so much.
I really love that you included something like that, where you included, here are lines or phrases that really spoke to me. What would you share why you did that? Because I think that that's a really, I think it's a meaningful touch, but I also think it's unique. I haven't seen too much of that. So tell me what brought that about. I love it.
Well, there were so many poems that I really like, I wanted to publish because there was maybe one or two lines that really stood out to me. But then because I'm writing about my life and my experience, and there are other people involved, maybe that was a poem that in its entirety I didn't feel comfortable publishing. So I pulled the line, and the short reading section is actually structured similarly to the book itself. So we'll start with like the three sections are We Were Too Young, Just Another Heartbreak Story, and I Still Have Love to Give. So the short reading section, the lines in the beginning are going to be from that first section, the middle are from the second section, and so on, but you don't necessarily know. It's a little more vague, I guess you could say, if people are trying to figure out who is this about, what's going on here. It's a little more vague. And so I felt a little more comfortable with that. And then I guess another inspiration would also be Taylor Swift, because she's always releasing these vault tracks on her re-records. And I'm like, trust me, I have a whole vault of poems that haven't been published, but they have some gold in them too. So I wanted to share that in the short reading section.
I love how you said that there's some gold in the vaults, because I think any writer, no matter if they've published something or if they haven't, if they've been writing for any period of time, even if they've been journaling and they've kept their journals, there, like you said, there's gold there. There's something there. And I love that. I love that you decided to tease some of that out and include it, because, that does, I just think that's creative. And I like how you got the inspiration too. That's so cool. So let's talk a little bit about the fact that you started writing with mystery, suspense,
Mm-hmm.
romance, suspense. And there's more books to follow in this genre, in this world. And yet we have nonfiction and slash poetry, self-help in this space. So yes, to your point, it's transcending, but in the same breath, there are some things to think about when you are working within those distinctly different spaces. Fiction does look a little different, the way you launch books, the way you talk about books, the way you talk about your pieces and such, than nonfiction in a sense, even though there's typically some kind of, like there's an overarching, I call it an umbrella. There's an umbrella that all of that messaging can still fit under, but yet
Mm-hmm.
you still might handle things a little differently, a little nuanced, because they're different pieces. So how does it feel working with a nonfiction and poetry launch and discussion versus the fiction work you've done?
There are some similarities and there are some differences. So when it comes to social media marketing, that part of it is pretty similar. I like to create graphics with the lines from the poems. I'll even pull some inspiration images from Pinterest and create these edits basically that promote the book in a similar way that I would do with a fiction release. But beyond that, I think it's more important when you're dealing with nonfiction to really get into the space not necessarily where you're talking about the book and how it was created and how it was released, but actually the topics that are talked about in the book. And so that might be doing podcast interviews and looking for guest blog opportunities, things like that, where you can focus on the topics, which would be divorce and dating and growing in your self awareness in those areas.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing too, by just what you've shared with me, is healing. I mean, it's showing, to your point about transcending the genres, but you're also transforming yourself as well as for your readers. So, I mean, there's that opportunity of, I really see nonfiction as a way of kind of being a helper, a guide to your reader to say, hey, take my hand. You can
Yeah.
do this too, because your reader is starting at a certain point, and by the end of that nonfiction piece, perhaps there's a transformation, there's a baby step in changing their
Yeah.
mindset, or a baby step in taking actions towards where they want to go, and your pieces help with that. So to your point that they're poems, they can read a particular poem and sit with it for a little bit and then say, "Hey, I need to read something else." And by reading that as slow as they need, or as quickly as they need, or revisiting, those are the baby steps they're taking that you're guiding them on.
And to that point, the reason why I really talk about reading it in order like you would a book is because it is more than just poems. After each section of poetry, I have a lesson learned, and then I have a commentary section where I talk even more in depth about my experience and what I've learned. And then in the back of the book, there is a survival guide, which is everything that I have learned in therapy. I will just give you a quick rundown of what's actually covered in the survival guide. So, accept when it's over, a note on surviving heartbreak, prioritize you, the importance of solitude, reflect on your previous relationship, exercises in growing your self awareness, put yourself out there, tips for navigating dating apps. Not every person can be your person, a note on dealing with rejection, the puzzle analogy, a compatibility mindset, advice for resisting unhealthy attachments, and a wrap up 10 steps to hope. So these are actionable exercises and steps and tips that people can use. And really the book ends with a note for the girly still hurting. So this acknowledges that by the time you finish reading this, you might not be ready to put all of this into action, but you have this little toolbox waiting for you when you're ready to actually take those steps.
Well, and what I'm hearing too is maybe they haven't been able to implement everything, but the fact that they picked up the book and started, that was something. And then
Yes.
they can come back and revisit in 6 months, in 4 months, in a year, and say, hey, let me read again, because now you're in a new space, you're in a new
Mhm.
headspace. And when you're in that new space, you've had new experiences to help you grow to where you are. So when you reread those poems, when you reread the commentary and the actions and such, you're coming from a new place, a different place. And you can say, I can see the steps I've taken, and I can still see where there's new growth too. So I really think it's cool how you structured this book, because it's poems. It's, to your point, the commentary, which I really think is cool too, by you just expounding more, offering more, writing it slightly differently too, because you're not
Mhm.
thinking about the structure of the poem per se. You're writing from another headspace, if you will.
Mhm.
And but then it's all tying together. I really
Yeah.
love that so much. How did you come up with the cover?
Well, I have the same cover designer who does all my fiction books. I just reached out to her and I said, "This is what it's about." And she comes up with about 20 different options. And we just narrowed it down to this. And I love it so much. It's a matte cover and it's also pink. So, and I wanted to make this pink. I know in the poetry sphere, the majority of the covers are, a very dark color. They're very serious. But I wanted this book, even though there are some very emotional poems in here, I wanted this book to be not only my favorite color, which is pink, but I just wanted it to look like something you would want, like just hope. I want this to sit on your table and you look at it and you're like, hope. So it's not always easy. This journey that we're on of healing and getting to that place where we have hope, it's not easy. There were 2 years, probably maybe three, in between my actual divorce and me writing this. And this represents a whole additional year of therapy and processing and healing. So, like you mentioned, someone might pick this up and be in one place and not necessarily be ready to put everything into action or have had the experience that allows them to really buy into what's in this book, but maybe one day they will. And so with the cover, I wanted to convey that this is hope.
I was thinking the same thing. That was the feeling that I get from it too, was hope, optimism, possibility. But the other thing that I really loved about the fact that you chose something different than what the genre tends to have is that your book is standing out, just
Mm-hmm.
and it is being visible, it is being seen, it's standing on its own apart from the crowd, if you will, just like you want your reader to ultimately be able to do, just like what
Yes.
writing your poems enabled you to do, in that respect of saying, I'm writing this, I'm showing up and this is how I'm feeling, I'm showing up and this is my message that I want to share and be there for somebody else. And you're showing your reader, you're showing your person, hey, you can do this, you can have this, the joy, the possibility, and be seen for you as the beauty, as the beautiful person that you are. I love that so much. What would you advise to a writer who maybe they want to write something like what you've done? Maybe they have some poems that they want to share. Maybe they've gotten as far as putting them in some kind of order. Maybe they have a cover idea, but maybe they're scared to hit publish or go through the actual steps to hit publish and confidently and bravely, like you're doing, talk about your pieces, because it is brave to put yourself
Mm.
out and hit publish and then continue to talk about it. So what would you say to that person?
This was definitely a struggle for me. Like I've kind of mentioned in this interview, there are poems that I didn't publish because I
Mhm.
felt, for whatever reason, maybe that is not something that other people need to read. So I think that you have to look at what you have and decide what's worth it to you. You know, make sure that you can stand beside every single word. Make sure you can defend every single word. And if you can do that, then I think, you know, you just have to rest assured in that. For me, it came down to what's the purpose here? Is the purpose for me, or is the purpose to help someone? Because for me, the help came in writing and actually doing the work. So, but for me, I felt that the purpose here was to share the work because I felt that it could be helpful to other people. So, know what your purpose is. I think if your purpose is to help someone else, you're probably more likely to put yourself out there a little bit more than if it's just for your own personal validation because you've already done the work in writing. Now, for me too, something that made me feel comfortable was talking to certain people in my life and telling them, I don't want you to read this. And I said, you can read it. I can't stop you, but I do not want to have a conversation with you about it. And so I had that conversation with, well, with one or two people. With another person, this might be an ongoing conversation. With the other one, they were very, respectful. They were like, well, can you pull some of the poems that you would be okay with me reading? Because I do want to read some of it. I want to support you. And I was like, sure, I'll do that. But they respected the fact that I didn't want them to read the whole book. So truly make sure that you're proud of every word. I know for me, I'm extremely proud of everything that I have gone through to get to this place. And I think when you have gone on a healing journey, I feel like when you finally make it to the other side, it's like you really don't care. You really don't care what anyone has to say because you know that everything you went through was necessary for you to be where you are now.
And you know what I hear you demonstrating is the true power of writing. And when you're writing and you're using it as a vehicle to help yourself, you really can be a beacon of light for someone else too. And you're telling your reader, you're not alone. I get it. I see you. And even when you're writing fiction, you can have characters that do that for your reader. The character says something that the reader goes, how did you know? But when it's nonfiction, when it's poetry, it's showing, hey, I see you and I don't want you to struggle, or I don't want you to feel alone as you're working through this. I realize I can't do it for you, but I can hold your hand. And I feel like
Yeah.
your poems, your book is like it's like a love note to your reader to say you can do this.
I think it's definitely a love letter to myself, maybe even to someone else. Um, one of the main reasons also in publishing this is I did want my fiction readers to get to know me better because, of course, there are different things in my novels that I feel personally connected to, but that's not always obvious. And then there are other things in my novels that people think are maybe my own experiences that haven't been. So with this, it's like I feel like, because I have had some readers stick with me from that very first book and who continue to message me and were happy to check this book out, even though they may not read poetry, but because it was me, they wanted to. And so, really, truly, for those people, I want them to be able to get to know me better because I plan on writing for many, many years to come. I hope to build a relationship with my readers. And I think when you read this, I mean, you're going to know one of the most sensitive, transformational things that's happened in my life.
I think that's really, really beautiful. And I love that you mentioned wanting to have that relationship with your reader. So that's really cool. That's really cool. And I am so excited for you and this book that is out. Congratulations. Very, very cool. Where can people connect with you, Emily? Where can they get this new book? Where can they become part of your world?
All of my books are on Amazon, published under Emily A. Myers. Myers is Myers. You can follow me on Amazon to make sure you never miss a release. On social media, I'm most active on Instagram and TikTok. And across all social medias, my handle is at Emily Myers Author. And last but not least, if you want to actually get in touch with me, I do have a website, www.emilyamyers.com, and I do have a contact form there. So if you're interested in reviewing, interviewing, or just talking about your own experience with maybe some of these topics that are in the book, you can reach out to me through that contact form.
Emily, this has been awesome. I am so excited for you. Congratulations.
Thank you.